What's up, everybody? This is Zach with another episode of EM Weekly. I'm really excited this week to be joined by Joseph, who's going to tell us about some really cool stuff that hopefully you already know about. And if not, we want you to find out about it. Joseph, thank you for joining me. And I'm super excited to have you because you're a fellow Vermonter. And apparently, like as the crow flies, I could probably throw a rock and maybe hit you from my house right now, which is very cool.
It is cool. Thanks for having me on the show, neighbor. I really appreciate it.
And speaking of neighbors, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you work for?
Sure. So my name is Joseph Porcelli, and I'm Nextdoor's global government lead, crisis response, and life safety lead. And my responsibilities here kind of span the gamut. I work with emergency managers across the country. During disasters, I help lead our response efforts, and in some cases communicate directly with our neighbors to help them prepare if we don't have coverage in a certain area from a local or state emergency manager. And I work with organizations like the National Fire Protection Association to help our neighbors understand what they can do to prevent fires, and organizations like FEMA to prepare for emergencies.
The little tiny CDC organization of FEMA. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, Nextdoor is used by 1 in 3 households across the country, very active membership, and there's lots of really important information that needs to get out to help people be safe and prepare and mitigate for disasters and hazards they face. And so we do that in a number of ways. There's a public agency platform that's free called Nextdoor for public agencies. Over 5,000 public agencies use it. About 20-some thousand communicators are being able to reach our message, or reach our neighbors. And essentially the platform is a built-in platform. So it's opt-out. So instead of having to earn the audience, that built-in audience is there, and they can, get messages out to them and geo-target those messages into specific neighborhoods. So we provide the platform. I spend a lot of my time helping to curate content that's available in our content library, because folks are super busy. So having worked in government myself in a number of capacities, I thought if I built this content library out, it would save a lot of time and more helpful content would get out, which would help people prepare for, respond to, recover from disasters more quickly.
We'll be right back after this quick break for ads.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
Yeah, it's really cool. We'll talk about specifically some of the initiatives you guys are doing in a moment. How did you get into your position? Kind of what's your background? And because I saw you got the NPLI, which is that's definitely one of the things that I think a lot of emergency managers, when they see that, are like, oh man, I really want to do it. I haven't done it yet. I'm definitely a huge fan. Every time I've seen presentations or seen work done by that organization, it's awesome. But yeah, if you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself where you're at.
Sure. It's a really, it's one of those things where if you look at my resume at individual points in time and where I am now, it would make zero sense.
You're preaching to the choir, my friend.
I started out just by taking action in my neighborhood. This is back in 2004. I was a database consultant at the time, ACT, Contact Management Database. And there was a lot of crime in my neighborhood. And it turned out my neighbors didn't know each other, and they were walking home from the T in Boston, lived in a neighborhood called Jamaica Plain. No one was communicating with each other. No one was communicating with the police, and we were just easy pickings. Yeah. And I wound up reaching out to the neighborhood watch unit. I'm like, hey, this is going on. They're like, we know. We were hoping someone would step up and take action. Yeah. And they're like, bring your neighbors together. And I threw awesome parties in college. So I really knew how to promote, get the word out. And so I asked her, I'm like, hey, give me 1,000 flyers. She's like, here's 100. Like, okay. So I grabbed them and I went and spent 15 minutes and printed out 100 flyers, and I called them back. I'm like, I want 1,000 flyers. They printed me another 100, and I just repeated that a number of times. I put 500 flyers
10
out.
times if my math is correct.
Basically, 100 people showed up to this community meeting, and they're like, "What happened?" I'm like, "I flyered the whole neighborhood." They're like, "You went to 500 houses?" I'm like, "Yeah, it took like 2 hours, no problem." And at that meeting, we learned we should get to know who our neighbors are. And actually, Bob Chicolo, I think he may have just retired from Boston PD, but I remember he said this thing to me. He's like, if you see someone going through your neighbor's window and it's not your neighbors, you should probably give us a call. And people are like, "Oh, that makes sense."
Crazy concept, right?
And so basically, I was doing these organizing initiatives. We did neighborhood socials so neighbors could meet each other, and local officers and folks from the city and inspectional services and that kind of stuff. And I did that for like a year, and it was fun. And then I started at one meeting, I'm like, I'm not sure what else to do. And I said to the community, like, what else would you like to do with this? And someone's like, well, why don't you let us get up and make announcements about things we're doing? And I'm like, that's a great idea. And people started announcing these things they wanted to do together. Someone started a book club, a running club, that kind of thing. And 2 years later, we had started 200 community service projects and social activity clubs. And we were doing these community organizing expos every quarter. 400 people would show up to meet their neighbors and do stuff together. It's like, oh, this is really neat. And at the time, crime started dropping in my neighborhood. So I got a call one day from Judy Wright, who was the director at the neighborhood watch unit at Boston PD. She's like, "Hey, I got an opening on my team. You want to come work for me?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah."
Yeah.
I'm not really that good at like working on servers and that kind of stuff. So I jumped at the opportunity. It was barely a livable wage at the time, but I was having lots of fun and created some new organizing models. In one neighborhood, we started like 100 and some neighborhood watch groups in 1 year, and Part 1 crime dropped 13%. I was like, "Ooh, moving on to something." That experience, though, showed me that, doing things manually on foot was a bottleneck, and I needed to figure out a way to connect neighbors to each other and to the police officers and other folks from the city that I was working with without me being in the way. And so I eventually discovered a platform called Ning, which is a social networking platform for whatever you want to do. And I wound up building the first social network for a city, for the city of Boston. And we first built a social network for the police department, and I built one for the neighborhood. By that time, my organizing efforts became a nonprofit called Neighbors for Neighbors. And what we learned is when there's not a lot of crime, it drops off. And so we built one social network.
Yeah.
We combined them, and then that really kind of, my career took off. The smartest thing I ever did is I emailed the CEO of Ning, Gina Bianchini. I'm like, "Hey, look what I did with your technology." And then 2 days later at the Personal Democracy Forum, she talked about it, and my career took off. My phone started ringing.
Yeah.
From there, basically, Ning had VIP reps for people doing cool stuff. And he calls me. He's like, "Hey, man, I got something for you." He's like, Homeland Security is going to build a social network for border affairs, and they need somebody with law enforcement consulting and like social networking experience. You're the only one in the country. You interested? I'm like, I don't know. So he set up a meeting. I drove down to DC, and I met with him, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm happy to do this for you, but I got to do it my way. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be real.
Yeah.
I'm not, no propaganda stuff." And they're like, "Do it." And I did. And that was a really interesting experience. And from there, a friend of mine who also built a social network on Ning, his name is Steve Ressler. He started govloop.com, and he got acquired by a company called GovDelivery, which is now Granicus.
Yeah. We all get, probably anyone who's got gets your email about trash day and alternative street parking and all that stuff. It's probably done through GovDelivery. Yeah.
So Steve, Scott Burns, who was the CEO, and I started a professional service practice around, doing engagement initiatives and stuff together. And from there, we landed FEMA as a client. And there I built community.fema.gov, which was the national preparedness community with Daryl Madden, who was head of the Ready campaign at the time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that was awesome. And so by this time, we're like 2014-ish. Nextdoor was raising lots of money. I thought it was awesome. And I kind of had to stop doing what I was doing in Boston. I wound up working in DC. The commuting on US Airways twice a week was not really fun. And so I moved to DC, and one day I just got the courage. I emailed the folks at Nextdoor, and it turned out that Sarah Leary, one of the co-founders, was a member of my social network in Boston.
No way. Yeah.
It's she's like, "I know that dude. Bring him in."
Yeah.
And in May, it will be 10 years that I've been at Nextdoor. So
that's so awesome. So there's like 15 different things I want to revisit in this conversation because I think, particularly for a lot of folks, I like to talk and I like to listen. Obviously, I have a podcast for it. This is basically just a professionalized way for me to leave my wife alone because she gets tired of hearing me say the same stuff over and over. But
we should introduce our wives.
Took
Probably
initiative.
Be good for both of us.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yes, it's been a saving grace, which is her name. So I've saved grace. You took initiative. This is something that I think a lot of people are afraid to do. I because I'm someone who just likes to listen to people, I found myself in so many conversations where people are like, I'm stuck in a rut. I need to know how to make my life better, or I have this thought on to make my the people around me better, whatever that is. And the hang up is almost always to simply take that first step. That's the scariest step, is always the first step.
That's right.
And so to look at a problem and take initiative you set yourself apart from everyone else. Because it's true. I mean, this is like 90, I don't know. This is a made up number. So it's correct 75% of the time, out of 100 times. I don't know, some random statistic. But I would say 90% of people stop whatever they're working on at the point of initiation because they're like, ugh, it's too much work. It's going to cost money. I don't have the time, whatever excuse we make. So how did you step over the Rubicon in this case to sort of make that initiative? Or were you just always like this?
I think my mom would tell you I've always been like this. I've also learned that when you take risks and try things, cool things can happen.
100%.
My whole career is here because I took action.
Yep.
I still am scared. I still do things that are daunting, but what I've learned is to fail often and gracefully and just accept that. And I've also just built a community of people who support me, who I will say, hey, I've got this idea, and they'll give me some feedback on it. And I've also learned I don't have to do things on my own, and I know what my strengths are and I know what my weaknesses are. And so I try and do things as, you talked about NPLI earlier. Meta leadership is not about, it's about doing things together and valuing everyone and not having to be the winner or the one who gets all the credit. It's just about doing the work for the sake of doing the work, for doing good that needs to be done. And so for me, that frees me up to do things. And, I think, not to get too existential, but I've learned to not worry about looking good. And that's also a risk. Like I'm not super competitive, and I don't want to be like, I just want to do the work. I like doing the work. I believe I'm here to help neighbors help each other, and technology has just been the medium in which I've practiced and learned to do that.
So that lack of arrogance and ego, I think I'm the same way. I don't like to take credit for anything. When people start to say anything or celebrate anything I've done, it makes me want to throw up and die. I'll give some more credit to my wife. She's like, it's like you love being in the spotlight, but the minute you realize it's on you, you freak out.
Yeah. I actually don't mind being in the spotlight, to be honest. It's more about...
Oh, so you're an egomaniac.
No, I mean, there are times when I
recognition is good. I think recognition is good, and being celebrated for good things is good.
I just focus on doing good. I don't. Yeah, I'm not trying to be seen as the leader. I just want to make it happen. I don't care if you're the leader. Yes. If I make it happen, I'm happy. That's the point.
So that's like confidence versus ego, right? If you're confident, you can take pride in the stuff you're doing because you're doing good things. Mm-hmm. If you let your ego take over, that's when you start to do things for the wrong reasons. The Machiavellian approach to leadership, and
I wouldn't exactly describe myself as a confident person either. I often feel awkward and uncomfortable. Yeah. I suppose my confidence has grown as I've gotten older. I think maybe it's more about willing to feel awkward and uncomfortable. Yeah. I'm become more comfortable feeling uncomfortable. That makes sense.
Yeah, I did stand up so I could basically learn how to live in that moment. And now I kind of relish it. And it has been a detriment to all of these social gatherings that we've had ever since, because nothing's off the table. I'm totally happy to embarrass myself in front of everyone. But yeah, no. So the other thing that I really want to focus on is the neighbors helping neighbors. And specifically, we can talk about the Storm Crew program that you're doing. But I want to talk a little bit before to discuss the science behind why this works, because you look at New England states, you look at New York, specifically New York City, DC. These are communities that have very high social capital. They take pride in where they are. And they care about their neighbors. They may not care about them all the time necessarily. Sure, we got neighbors disputes. I mean, if you spend any time in New York City, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time in New York City, you think everyone hates everyone. But when push comes to shove, those communities come together and they help each other out and they respond to it. The Boston Strong, post 9/11 New York. There's plenty of examples of this, but it also is probably the most accurate measure of community resilience that you can have. I have sort of pushed back on the individual preparedness approach because I think that in order for anyone to survive a real true disaster, you'll never do it on your own. You have to have a community. I mean, we're a social species, right? Like humans have been parts of communities since the dawn of time. And but what's changed is how we make that community. And you're talking about sort of that evolution from pre-internet to now only internet for how some people get, their social lives. So I guess if you have thoughts on the social capital aspect or just sort of community resilience and why Nextdoor has recognize this where maybe other organizations haven't really taken as strong an approach to this, and how you guys are using this and leveraging it for your Storm Crew and other initiatives that you've done.
Sure. I'm gonna answer this a little differently than you asked it, but I think it gets the point across. So, Storm Crew, let me just tell people what that is real quick. On Nextdoor, we have an initiative called Storm Crew, and on our help map, and if you're on Nextdoor on the residential platform, you just sign in, go to the Discover tab, and there's a help map. On the help map, you can ask for and offer help. Because it's winter, we're suggesting people shovel each other out. Ask for help shoveling or offer your neighbor help shoveling. It's working. It's awesome. I love it. I'm so freaking happy about it. And it matters to government, to emergency managers, because essentially we're reducing the burden on government so government can focus on the most acute cases of whatever people need, right? It also builds connection and resilience between neighbors. So when you learn somebody needs help shoveling, you're probably going to check in on them for any time anything happens, right? Which is valuable, right? And I'm sorry, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think the expectation that government is going to help you do anything outside of really a truly 911 emergency during, even a routine type event is kind of unexpected. It's why the social media videos of the fire truck stopping by and, they're digging out the fire hydrant and then, let's help the elderly, neighbor, shovel their driveway and do all this stuff. It's just because there isn't capacity or bandwidth. There is no other solution. And I think that's, it's okay to call that out. You are one of only a handful of ways that this can be done. And I think it's critical. I think it's not being done, especially by some communities that just frankly have no capacity. They're not even trying to create these types of movements.
So coming back to the story, back in 2013, I had a horrible marketing idea called Snow Crusade. So Storm Crew used to be called Snow Crew, and it was powered by SeeClickFix. My friend Ben Berkowitz was the CEO of SeeClickFix, and we hacked it. So you, instead of reporting something to the city, you report it to your neighbors. Yeah. We ran that for a couple of years successfully. It was awesome. But to promote it, I drove from DC to Boston on a snow crusade. Didn't go viral. But on my trip up 95, I stopped and shoveled neighbors that requested help shoveling.
Yeah.
And what I noticed is every single person who requested help shoveling had neighbors. And when I talked to them, they're like, yeah, I don't know. I'm afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we're doing at Nextdoor is we're productizing and normalizing asking and offering for help. And because 1 in 3 households use the platform, chances are pretty good that you're going to get help or someone's going to take you up on your offer because people need help shoveling. And shoveling isn't just about like removing snow. It's about stabilizing folks, right? They can get to work, to school, to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, that kind of stuff. And that really kind of reinforced an experience I've had that if people who live nearby each other know who needs help with what and when and how they can help them, many people will take that action. So we're trying to solve that problem. And with so many people connected to Nextdoor, whether or not they're social capital, it does like, one of the things about moving back to Vermont is, the first day here, like 5 neighbors stop by and introduce themselves. Like I'm usually the one that has to do that. I was like, this is amazing, but that's just our culture. I love that.
Sure.
But I believe there's an innate human desire and need to connect and to contribute and to belong. And so we're facilitating that on the platform, which I think is really important. I did another interview this morning with a reporter out of Ohio, and I finished the interview by saying, it's through service to each other that we discover what we have in common. And right now there's so many external inputs, social media, all the things that separate us. And I feel like that's really dangerous because there are things we have in common. Like I have a buddy who's like totally opposite on the political spectrum.
Sure.
And, we've been friends since high school and we just ask each other questions and we listen. And I know all the things we have in common because we've gotten to that point. And service is a great way to just discover the humanity in each other. And asking for help is actually a gift. You're giving someone the opportunity to contribute to you. And when you help somebody, you're giving the gift of demonstrating to them that they matter, that they're important, that their life is valuable. And there's this magic. I've been trying to figure out how to articulate this, but it just feels really good. And there's not enough of that really good feeling. And so, thinking about, all the disasters and stuff that are happening, like every 18 days, there's $1 billion disaster, right?
Yeah.
Something like 90% of disasters involve flooding. 1 in 3 Americans have experienced, some kind of crazy weather. 1% of people are displaced every year now. It's crazy. Like there is a crucial need out there for assistance and help. And I feel that, the place that Nextdoor plays in this marketplace of connecting all these neighbors to each other so they can help each other is essential and critical right now. And as you can tell, I'm really passionate. I don't want to I feel like I'm preaching, but it's what I believe here.
No, I think it's a reality. The other thing that, so there's 2 things I want to go back to. One is the polarization. When you talk to anyone, if you don't bring up politics, you find out we're all kind of after the same thing, right? Like we want to, have a roof overhead. We want to have, the opportunity to, succeed on our own. We want security. We want food, just the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then, so how do we do that? I really like that you said that you've got, I'm in the military. I've got friends of all sorts of different political backgrounds, of all sorts of extremes. One of my, closest friends, we disagree on a lot of things. The minute we start to disagree on something, we say purple because it's red and blue mixed together. And we're like, that's our signal to pause for a second and sort of say either A, we're arguing for the exact same thing. We're just doing it through 2 stupid ways or we're being stupid and we're getting nowhere. So let's, take a break from this. But it is I think people have really sort of created a tribal relationship to a lot of different things, and it's not necessarily helping us. And when you're in a disaster, that communal suffering brings everyone together. It levels the playing ground because nothing else matters when, the neighbor's house burns down and they lose everything. Any good, human being is going to go, what can I do to help them? And it doesn't have to be anything big, right? It can be a little act. Social media, I think, has changed how we approach problems in that, I was thinking about, buying a car or whatever. I bought a car last year. I knew everything I needed to know before I went to the dealership. I really didn't need the dealership to do anything. I just needed them to sign the paperwork so I could go pick up my truck and they could leave me alone the rest of the time.
Is
I didn't need them
Carvana
selling
sponsoring this podcast today? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it is. It is like, I think most people are going to do their investigation before they do anything now, because you have the ability to. Anytime I'm meeting with someone, I go on LinkedIn, try to find out the professional. If I can find them on other social media, I will, just to kind of get an idea of like, what are their interests? What kind of things are they into? I have avoided Facebook and Twitter more often than not, just because it gets so ugly sometimes, but, and that's fine. Right. I actually don't care if people have like, short of like absolutely abhorrent views on stuff, but like, we express ourselves in different ways, whatever. But we do our window shopping first online. So I think that's why Nextdoor is kind of cool, is like, you have a neighbor that comes in, like, walking up to someone's door and knocking and saying like, hey, I'm your new neighbor, is pretty intimidating, especially like nowadays when everyone's got a gun and you just don't know. Right. And so it is a way to sort of gently open that door and just say, hey, I'm here, and here's some stuff I'm into. Here are, here's what I look like. Here's my family. So if you see me around town, and it sort of gives permission, like, oh, okay, I can talk to them. Like they're saying it's okay for me to approach them. And now that has happened. And I think in a disaster, we talk about it all the time in emergency management. You don't exchange business cards in the middle of a storm. And so having that network ahead of time, I really like like what you were talking about earlier about, joining, groups in your neighborhood or forming collective groups, because you can share passions. I go to New York Comic-Con every year. I'm not a huge comic book guy per se. I love sci-fi and that type of stuff, but I'm not a diehard hardcore person. But when I am in the Javits Center, surrounded by, tens of thousands of fellow nerds, I'm all in. Like, it is just, you're safe. You can let down of your, social barriers, that awkwardness that we were talking about earlier, because you're like, cool, I'm accepted here and it's okay. And now those folks are in my circle. So if something were to happen, I can rely on it. You can see this actually, when emergencies happen at Comic-Con, it's amazing. Like, all of a sudden people come together, people, it's tens of thousands of people have medical emergencies and all this stuff. And you just see all these folks who are like, is anyone an EMT? Oh, I know CPR. All right, let's all like come together and solve this. And there's no hesitation, where when you're out in like random community where you don't know anyone, no one knows each other, and you see someone drop, everyone goes into bystander, mode. And they're like, well, someone else will call for help. I don't know who this is. I don't want to get involved. I don't know why this is happening. Maybe there's some reason, maybe they're on drugs. Maybe they're a criminal. Like, it's all this stuff that like we're projecting onto other people because we don't know. So I think any way that we can break that down is huge. And then having a platform like this from an emergency manager's perspective, in the sunny days, I got to go in there, get a feel for what my community is interested in and what they're doing. And I can share that information ahead of time. We talked, I think it was yesterday? It was yesterday, about just like, how to sort of change how we're approaching preparedness and readiness.
That's right.
And using like behavioral economics, the nudge, right? Instead of saying you need 72 hours worth of supplies, which is potentially thousands of dollars, which people don't have, say, hey, while you're at the grocery store this week, grab an extra, gallon of milk or a gallon of water and, store it somewhere. Or
refill
buy some granola
refill
bars.
that juice box or that soda bottle with water and put it in your freezer.
Check your gas cans that are, next time you're going to get gas for the lawnmower or something, maybe fill an extra one up so you've got it for a generator.
Incremental preparedness.
Car. Yeah, I think it's just such a more approachable and realistic thing. And eventually, I like to do this even in how I write plans and stuff. I don't like to just dump all this stuff on them. I want them to sort of like start to pick up, okay, we're doing your hazard vulnerability assessment. Let's get that on our feet. Let's get used to that. Let's get comfortable. Now we got our emergency operations plan. Let's get used to that. Let's get comfortable. And you just slowly build out this thing and you make it like really easy. You work on small components at a time. It takes longer for sure. But it's like almost going back to the first conversation of like, when it's so big and so daunting, people don't want to do it because they're afraid of that first step. So if there's a way to break that down, which Nextdoor does, I think really, really effectively. And it's funny because I've been in and out of Nextdoor for however long you guys, I joined when I was, I think with the state, cause I was a community liaison when I was there. And I've dropped off for a little while and I logged back in. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't been in here in a while. Like I should check this out. And I'm like, look at all this stuff that's happening around me. I still get the email thread. So I get all the information, but I haven't actually logged in and checked it out.
The app is a great experience.
It's just, I think people need to find that community, and it can be, however, if you got the guts to go knock on doors and say, hey, what's up? I'm your neighbor. That's awesome. Go to the meetings in person. I think in person is always better. But if you're nervous or you're not ready, I mean, this is like the perfect opportunity to test the waters, if you will.
And let me just clarify one thing for the emergency managers out there. There's the Nextdoor residential platform, which you've been talking about. We have a free government platform called Nextdoor for public agencies that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. If you're not using that, just like that business card exchange during the next disaster is not the time to I should start using Nextdoor. Go to nextdoor.com/agency and you just fill out the form. We pre-verify every government agency that applies. So you're verified once you're there. That allows you to communicate with every person who's using Nextdoor in your municipality. Geo-target posts, the audience is built in, and only you can start conversations. So it's not something else to manage. It's another tool in your toolbox to reach more people in specific places. The cool thing I just remembered that I forgot to say earlier is that you can give us your shape files for flood zones or hazard areas, and you can target specific messaging to different cohorts of your community based on the hazards they face, based on geography or based on where they live. So that is just an essential tool for emergency managers. And talking about preparedness, in our content library, which you can access through the product, there's over 100 different suggested posts that I've written. Many of them are preparedness posts. And I mentioned the term incremental preparedness. You do need to suggest one simple step. Telling your community to build a kit makes how, where, why, But if you say, I was working with LA Emergency Management earlier this week. I think I told you about that yesterday.
Yeah.
How are you storing water? And we give options that make sense based on, you have the stackable containers, you've got the water bladders, or you're filling up old water jugs. That is a free way to do something that you probably have no matter what your economic status is.
Yeah.
And that makes it accessible to folks. Mary Jo Flynn Nevins, who is commissioner of Sacramento Emergency Services, she said something to me years ago that I practice in my own home is with that incremental preparedness, it's that one extra can of beans and you rotate, right? We have to make preparedness accessible and doable and not daunting. And what I've seen a lot of emergency managers do is take these polls that are pre-written that has this content already and put it out. And polls are really fun. Like we talked about yesterday, it's kind of gamifying, right? Nobody in the history of time has ever woken up and nudged their partner like, hey, honey, let's talk about preparedness. It doesn't happen, right? So
I'm sure there's some hardcore nerdy emergency managers that, yes,
all right. I stand corrected. I don't mean to be disrespectful.
Not me, for sure.
But I mean, it's there's a ton of value there. And there's, when you think about the social landscape right now, Nextdoor helps you reach your residents. We're really good. We don't help you reach visitors or businesses. But if you are looking to increase preparedness and build capacity in your community, that's such an awesome platform. You can, we're doing Storm Crew, which is great. Your neighbors are connected, but you can really invest and instruct people how to do it. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of emergency managers are doing a lot of preparedness is can't measure it. I've come up with a mechanism that you can. We've proven that to be successful. So anybody interested in that, anybody listening here that wants to reach out and talk more, I forgot to say this earlier, Joseph at Nextdoor is my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn and I'd love to chat.
Put all that info in the show notes. This is awesome. I will definitely have you back on because I think, it sounds like when we were talking, yesterday before the podcast, there's all sorts of cool, innovative stuff you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so, I know you've been there for 10 years, but it sounds like, you're just getting started and there's, every single time I guess we've only chatted twice, but both times like you've talked about these like initiatives and ideas that are like, it's just kind of hanging out there. Like, how do we fix this thing?
Well, I love learning. I mean, one of the, I've already learned a lot from you, and I love talking to emergency managers to hear what's on their mind and what they're solving, because one of the things I can do is connect them to each other. Right. Like, and I like to, I host webinars in our resource hub where our content library is, and where people can learn about all the cool stuff everybody's doing. Like, this is a community, and, thank you. I reached out to you cold on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey man, I just moved to town. I don't know too many people in the, in the space. And you're like, sure. And look what it turned into, right? It's just, relationships really matter, and they're key. One thing I did want to touch on that you mentioned in the beginning is the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative. It is a wonderful experience. There's in-person and there's online. I'm a global ambassador for them. It is immensely helpful because it connects you to people cross-sector, and just the frameworks and tools they provide are so helpful. They're helpful in your thinking and your problem-solving capacity, and helping you be an effective meta leader. I would hope, like, my dream would be there'd be like funding for everybody who wants to do it. It's the online program is fairly accessible, and you can get funding to do the in-person. Like you said, there's nothing like that, but it is such a powerful program, and it really helps.
I mean, it's just the network from that, it's like the FBI Academy for police. It's National Fire Academy, for firefighters. Like, when you attend these things and you get to like be with like the brightest minds, who are all doing different things, that mishmash, the diversity of, thought and background and experiences, just makes, this is why, again, like, don't think of preparedness as it's your sole responsibility. I think it's so important to find a community of people, our little neighborhood here. We go out, we talk, before a major event, like, across the street, my neighbor is a former Air Force emergency manager, so he knows like CBRN stuff really well. My other neighbor is a combat vet. Like we go through stuff. We're like, hey, what happens if this happens? Who's going to take responsibility? We share our resources. It's how you survive a critical incident. And so anything that makes that stronger, I think is so critical. And I think Nextdoor is definitely one of those tools. And I will definitely be bothering you more because one of the things, we had the major windstorm that went through, and I wish we had enacted the neighbor helping neighbor, because we had a bunch of neighbors that had their homes destroyed just down the road. I don't think many people even knew it happened. Like, it's so just trying to get that information out there. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I will definitely have you back on. There'll be everything in the show notes. Any closing thoughts before we go?
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me on the show, and thank you to everyone who's listening for the work you do in your communities. It's a lot, and I appreciate it. Everyone at Nextdoor appreciates it. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, Joseph, we'll chat soon. Like, subscribe, leave comments, email Joseph for more information so you can learn about this. And like I said, I'll put everything in the show notes, and thanks for listening.